Now, when the Napoleonic Wars were over in 1815, Spain asked the nations of Europe, hey, we'd like for you to pitch in and help us get our colonies back. The nations of Europe said, we're tired of war, we're not going to help you. But there were two reasons that the nations of Europe didn't really assist. Reason number two, according to your book, was the Monroe Doctrine. President James Monroe of the United States told European countries, if you invade the Western Hemisphere, we'll meet you with our Navy. But the main reason, what the Europeans feared most, was the British Navy. The British said, see, the British all of a sudden found that they could trade profitably with these newly formed Latin American republics, and get much more profit than ever had under Spanish rule. So the British, in effect, said to Europe, stay out of Latin America. Latin America is free to stay. So between the British Navy and the United States getting together and telling European nations stay home, and European countries feeling tired of war anyway, European countries did not venture in, with the result that these Latin American countries will remain independent. And they have remained independent to this day. The Latin American countries began as republics, and from that day till about 20 or so, 30 years ago, they were trying democracy and failing. Like I say, lately, most of them have finally adopted democracy and had some success with it. But these nations would start out with republics, and inevitably a dictator would take over. They'd eventually overthrow that dictator, try again a Republican form of government, and another dictator would take over. And the story of Latin American history, throughout much of its the 18 and early 1900s, has been a story of one dictatorship taking over after another, some dictators more successful than others. And as for your dictators, your book says some of them were modernizers who built roads, canals, ports, and schools. And others were extremely harsh and destructive. And your book singles out one of the worst dictators in Latin America, a man named Santa Anna. And you might guess, he was a Mexican. This will take a few, I'm going to do it anyway. Starting with me. This is me, my father, my grandfather. All right, 3 in a row. Then if the names change, Mary, his name was mother's name Mary. And then from Mary you get Persifer. Persifer's father was Richard. But Richard had a twin brother named Persifer. Now why am I doing all this? This Persifer, who was a twin brother to my great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, was slain by Santa Anna. He was one of 365 Americans whom Santa Anna rounded up and shot before a firing squad for no reason, weren't even in active rebellion. You might can guess, folk, I have no love for Santa Anna. In one of my dreams, I dreamed that I was about to face Santa Anna's firing squad. I mean, this is a little bit of family history, but anyway, this one, great-great-great-great-uncle, twin brother to my great-great-great-grandfather, lined up. Well, Santa Anna paid for that. The Texans finally rallied to got together en masse, and caught Santa Anna in a siesta. Now, if any of you have been to Latin America, know the Mexicans like to take siestas. And I must say, a lot of doctors say it's a good idea. Take a sleep in the afternoon, and you'll wake up more alert and refreshed. But Santa Anna took a siesta, not knowing where the Texas Army was. And while he was in the middle of siesta, the Texas Army swooped down on him, and Santa Anna ran pell-mell from the battlefield in his purple underwear. And again, if you're in a military situation and you see your commander-in-chief tear off from the battlefield, what do? You follow him, yeah. My dad once said, even the brave, it's been happened several times, so even in our own history, where the commander-in-chief the leader, the top general, would take off running, and every time he does, his troops always follow him. Santa Anna did not know that Sam Houston and his men had 750 men, and he had 600. I mean, he had 1,600, they had 750, but instead, he took off running. His troops all ran. Sam Houston's men went around rounding up Santa Anna and his troops, and they forced Santa Anna to sign a paper giving Texas her independence. So no, the United States did not steal Texas from Mexico. Texas stole itself. Texas stole itself. Now, you can say the United States took California, New Mexico, and Arizona, and Nevada, but not Texas. Texas took itself. And again, why did my great-uncle, great-great-uncle here go to Mexico? Here's why. I mean, go to Texas. Here's why. They were told, the Americans were told by one government, you come here, you can have a plot of land, you can farm it. Because at this time, Mexico could not get its citizens to move into Texas. So they told him, you can come in, but then another government would take over and they would say, get out. Another government would take back over and say, you're welcome here. He thought he was welcome. And he wound up lined up before a firing squad. But, as a result, the Texans who were left got together and they drove Santa Anna and the Mexicans out of Texas. Again, I can't feel sympathetic toward the Mexicans in this regard. I mean, I've had teachers tell me that the United States has done Mexico dirty. You can decide for yourself. I think that Mexico played a big hand in it. Due to their own lack of stability and lack of stable government. All right. No, I don't encourage hatred of the Mexicans, even though I guess I do encourage hatred of Santa Anna. I have no particular love for him. The Mexicans, the Mexican War, the war we fought with Mexico might not have been justified. In 1845 and 1846, the United States fought a war with Mexico and took from Mexico the territory of Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and California. Took from Mexico. All right. Another problem that Latin America has had, and again, you can't sum up, because Latin Americans resent the people in the United States, some of us all, hey, we're not all alike. We sum them up and say we're all Latin American. And they say we're not all, but they have had a few things in common. Number one, they've had an economic system where the poor are way down here, very, very poor. The very, very poorest people are called peons. The very poor are hopelessly poor with no chance of rising up, hardly. And then at the top you have your very, very rich, super rich, with nobody hardly in between. Extreme wealth on the one hand, extreme poverty on the other. Again, with nobody in between, just two social classes mainly. And they've also had a problem separating church from state. Church and state have much too often been one. And this is known to be bad on the countries that haven't separated church from state. As long as the church is allowed to be the church and the state is allowed to be the state, things seem to go better. But when the church starts meddling in the affairs of the state or vice versa, both sides seem to lose. And again, this is just a fact of history. Latin America could not separate church from state. The book goes on to talk about Diaz. Again, I'm now looking on page 583. Diaz ruled Mexico for several years, but unfortunately during his time, Mexico became even poorer. The average Mexican became even poorer. And eventually Diaz was forced from power by another dictator. And again, folks, don't worry about the names so much, just note the pattern. This dictator would take over and he'd try to straighten things up, and after a while he'd be shoved out. As the political winds changed, another dictator would take over and he'd eventually be shut out. And this was to be Latin America's history for about 150, 180 or so years. Your book mentions too that a lot of the poor people went to the big cities